This video is about a property of mine that's currently vacant. The tenants have just left, and the dangers of getting emotionally attached to property and thinking that they can sometimes be worth more than they actually are just because they're yours. So this property was tenanted for quite a few years through my current agency. They're really good at placing tenants. I never had any trouble from these tenants. What they apparently do is they do all the electronic checks, everything that you're supposed to do, and then once the tenants go through the system, they're then again checked manually by the staff. So this is a very thorough approach. I think only less than 1% of their tenants ever fall into arrears. So basically these tenants were there for about 3 years. They've had to move out. I think they're moving elsewhere. There was no real issues with the property while they were there. There was a couple of things here and there which I rectified immediately. But now the property's been vacant for a few weeks. So this is as expected because tenants are not really going to move in straight away. The property has been advertised for a while. We did have an inquiry from a family. They were inquiring about having a pet in the property, and it was an old cat, which means it probably wouldn't be too hyperactive and cause too much damage. So I was willing to let those tenants come into the property and stay there as long as the cat didn't cause too much damage, and whatever damage was caused by the cat could potentially be reclaimed from the deposit. But I think those tenants pulled out for some reason. So when your property is up for rent with a good agency and it's vacant, after a while, if the property hasn't fetched much interest, then the rent is lowered a little bit in order to attract more interest. This is logical, and if you keep the rent at a certain level quite high and there has been no interest, then it's better to try and adjust it and lower it to get more interest in the property. The issue I've been having with this is that, in my eyes, the rent for this property has not really increased much in almost 10 years. And this is a very central property. It's right next to the train station. It's right next to town centre. It's a development that was created about 20 years ago. So it's all got modern construction. It's a really desirable property. But my issue is that apparently there is a lot of news these days about how much rents have risen, and because this is a sort of prime property, my query with the agency was that why has this rent not risen very much in about the last 10 or so years. The agency informed me that there are a lot of properties on the market, and a lot of those properties are high spec. This property was built in about 2004, and I'm being told that is now quite dated. Many landlords would take this sort of thing personally, but as I know the agent and they've got a good reputation, they do things properly and thoroughly, I take these things objectively. So I looked online myself just as a quick check. I mean, I trusted what they were saying, but I just wanted to have a look myself, and many of the other properties are very modern and very high standard, and they are commanding higher rents. Whether they're getting rented out or not, that's another issue, but you can work out these things as well. I didn't look into it in that much depth because, again, you want the high time value of passive property. You leave everything to the agency. So in the back of my mind, as mentioned, my issue was that this rent has not risen much in 10 years for a property that should be commanding extremely high rent now. But as I've understood the situation more, to me the property is still relatively new, but relative to other properties, and because Coventry has boomed so much, the rental standard has become very high in many other properties. This house cannot compete with other houses on the market. I would think that I could maybe charge around 12 or 1300 a month for this property, if not more. But because it hasn't not been modernised, then I can't really do this. When the last tenants vacated, I claimed £500 from the deposit just for some painting work and things like that could be proven due to inventories. So the property was very well repaired and all the wear and tear was removed. This is all well and good, but I was advised that if I want even higher rents, I want to replace the carpets and things like that. I've opted not to go with that at this stage, but my first mentor told me, as a general rule of thumb, if you invest any money in a property and you can make that money back within 3 years and it improves the rent you get from the property, then it's always worth it. I could have tried that, but I just didn't fancy it in this case. I've got a couple of vacant properties at this stage, so I would just prefer to get them rented back out, and this is ultimately up to you. You could spend a bit more money and it could take a bit longer to rent out a property for a higher rental after a certain time, or leave it vacant for a shorter time, not completely modernise the property and then rent it out for a slightly lower rent. There is overall no wrong and right. It's up to you what to do with the property. But it reminds me of other issues where I've spoken to the owner of this agency, who is a personal friend. He informs me this happens a lot. So when people are selling their houses, the agency estimates a fair market value for the property, but many owners state that they have made so many improvements to their property, and because it's their property, they've looked after it for so many years, it should be worth so much more. Many improvements do not often add to increase in value. For example, if you put in a driveway, that increases the value, or a loft conversion or a 2-story extension, these can increase the value. But many of the cosmetic improvements don't always lead to increased value, and many landlords don't understand this. They get emotional about it. There are often ceiling prices for certain areas as well, which means that if you spend many thousands of pounds on your property, it still cannot generally sell for more than the properties in the area, even if it's nicer than those properties, due to the ceiling price. So many owners do get emotional about these kinds of things and can fall out with the agency, and may end up going to a worse agency and getting even worse service and selling their property for less. So when investing in property and trying to make it as passive as possible, it's good to be objective rather than emotional. You find a good agency, you trust their judgment, you see their track record, and you can check if what they're telling you is correct or not. Try not to see it as your own personal property, rather it is a house, and the agency are giving the fair market value for it, or the fair rental value for it. So in the case of my property, I've found myself thinking that it's vacant and the rent should be so much higher. The agency have explained why I cannot hike the rents that much. I've accepted their explanations. In my mind, it should be $1,300 to $1,400 a month rental, but it's been put at $1,250. Now I'm lowering it to $1,200 to see if there's more interest. I was actually advised to lower it to $1,150 per month. I haven't done that yet, but if it remains vacant for a bit longer, then I'll do that. So in essence, it's good to once again trust a good management agency that will make the investment as passive for you as possible. Try not to get too emotional about the fact that this is your own property and you personally feel it should be worth more. The agent know what they're doing, and just trust the process. Thanks again, see you next time, and once again let me know if you need any help or advice with regards to your property investment journey.